the way I learned this business, so I did a postgrad at SOAS, and then I was living in London, very close to SOAS for a year while I did the course. And what I did was every day I went to the British Museum, sometimes to the V&A, sometimes to the Wallace Collection, but mostly to the British Museum. Every day I went for between 15 minutes and 2 hours, and I used to walk around the first floor. You've all been to the first floor, right, in the British Museum? Yeah. So I walked around the British Museum, around, until I memorised most of the pieces in there, Chinese, Southeast Asian, Indian, and just reading the labels and looking at the pieces and going around the back of the pieces and looking. And so what happened was you build up, and you can do this wherever you live. If you live in Phnom Penh or if you live in Bangkok, just go to the national museums there and just build up a visual memory of provenance, excellent, authentic, unquestionably great pieces. And once you've got that visual memory, everything you see after that in the future you'll have a visual comparable. So if something is fake or it's not right, you can't do it instantly. You have to just keep doing it. It takes years, but eventually you'll have a visual memory to identify problem pieces. And so things come in here and they just don't quite look right, and I can't always articulate why they're wrong, but they just don't fit. On the other hand, if you only look at museum pieces, the British Museum, for example, has a very narrow band in certain areas, often because they were donated by 1 or 2 people. So Gandhara sculpture, for example, like this, there are some incredibly unusual Gandhara pieces that don't fit in college textbooks, so things that look like Western sculptures or look Gothic in style. So you can't just assume that if there isn't a comparable in a museum collection that the piece is wrong. You have to keep an open mind, and it's the same with Thai art. Often you find, you know, for example, King Rama IV, Mongkut, he had a great reverence for Buddhas. So in the 19th century, he built a collection of Buddhas in different styles from all around the world. So if you go to the Bangkok Museum, there's a Gandhara fasting Buddha, emaciated Buddha in the Bangkok Museum, but it was made in the 19th century. So you have to keep an open mind. Anyway, so that's what I did. Walked around the British Museum, went to auction viewings all the time, because you can actually handle the pieces and look at them. Go to galleries when you can. And the other thing I did was I volunteered at Sotheby's for a summer, and I worked in the Japanese department. Does anyone know Max Rutherston? No, he's a Japanese specialist. He does NETK, and I wondered if he'd lecture. No, he's a nice guy. But I worked for him for 2 months doing cataloguing and all kinds of things, fetching coffee and anything. But it was great fun. And then what happened was, at the end of the course at SOAS, I was offered a job at Spink. And has anybody here ever heard of Spink? Yeah. Because a lot of people your age don't know them, but they used to be around the corner. If you face the front of Christie's, the building to the right of Christie's, that was Spink. And Spink were a 300-year-old art dealers. Don't lean on the painting, because you might. Okay, sorry. They were a 300-year-old art dealership, and they dealt in everything from Chinese art, Southeast Asian, paperweights, English paintings, silver, gold bullion, medals, coins, banknotes. They were an incredible company, and they were owned by Christie's. And in 2000, Christie's basically closed off Spink and sold it. And so my wife and I both worked for Spink, and then we opened this gallery in 2000. Right, so let's look at a few typical Southeast Asian pieces, things that might come up in your exams. Does anybody know? It's pretty obvious what that is, but can anyone tell me anything about this piece? And does anyone not know what that is? Okay, it's a standing Buddha. It's made of teak, and it has gilding and lacquer and inlay, which is very common in this type of Buddha. It has mirror work inlay, and the right hand's wobbly. But yes, so tell me where that's from and what style it is, what period. very good. Yeah, very good. Mandalay. So it's a typical 19th, early 20th Mandalay standing Buddha. And does anyone know what he's holding in his right hand?
Fruit?
Yeah, it's a fruit. It's a. Do you know what the fruit's called? Very good, Maribel. Yeah, and when the Buddha was, just before the Buddha's enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, he was fasting. He stopped eating for 28 days, I think, and so he had problems with his stomach. And so this fruit helps gastric problems with the stomach. So it's called a Marabilan or Mirabilan, and it has magical qualities. And you often see Buddhas, especially Burmese Buddhas, where they hold this fruit. So, and I was going to talk about provenance, but one thing with me is I don't buy in Asia anymore. I used to buy, but about 15 years ago I stopped, because people these days, they want Bangkok. There's no offence to David, but there's a lot of fakes in Bangkok. You can't export these pieces legally, and these days European and American collectors, they want provenance for the piece. So because of the colonial history of Britain, there are a lot of Burmese and Indian pieces come up at auction, if you know where to look. And old Spink clients of mine, and actually people walking past. So I prefer to buy things at auction, or from all collections, or from people who drop in. And because I've been here for 20 years, I'm quite well known around here, and so people are always banging on the door with things or sending emails. So I'll give you an example. That Buddha over there, standing in the corner, that was inherited by a German Catholic priest in the 1960s, and his father bought it about 50 years ago. And when he decided to become a priest, he decided that he couldn't have any Buddhas in his house. So he was walking past it. But that's one of my favourite pieces at the moment. It's a beautiful, elegant Buddha. He decided that he couldn't have Buddhas in the house, so I acquired it from him. So, and that's quite common these days. A lot of people sort of walk past. And, okay, so I'm just going to go over here a second to try and avoid as much cheating as possible. Does anyone know which country? This is pretty obvious where this is from. But Thai. What period is it? It's not Sukhothai. It's Ayutthaya.
Ayutthaya.
Yeah. So this is a good middle Ayutthaya period. So I put 17th on this, possibly 18th, and yeah, I'll see what I'll do. If you can come through here, but if you look at the left foot, just go through a couple at a time, but it has an old repair on the left foot, which has been done in probably 50 or 60 years ago. And I'll just show you a typical one. The Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg has some fantastic examples. Yeah, this one. This is you can pass this around. This is the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. They're Thai collections, but that one's quite similar. You see the tips of the row is very pointed here, and the proportions and the face and the head. But that is a good example. In fact, this one I use as a comparable for a lot of pieces that I've handled. But, so that's the Hermitage, State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. There's a very similar one. Yeah, just have a look at the left foot and you'll see. So obviously in Buddhism, people repair sculptures during worship as an act of reverence for the Buddha. And so I've had a lot of pieces where they, you find old repairs. And in fact, I can't just turn this around. This is another Ayutthaya image. If you look at the left ear on this, look, that's, you see, that's been done in ancient times, long ago, perhaps 100 years ago. So this head is, has anyone been to Wat Mahathat in Ayutthaya? Has anyone ever heard of it? You have me. There's a I'll show you a picture, but one of the most famous Buddha images in the world is at Wat Mahathat. And what happened was that the sculpture was damaged and they put the head, this is stone head, very similar to this in style and date. They put the stone head in a tree, in a Bodhi tree. And so the tree, over the centuries, the tree's grown around the head, and so the head it's an amazing thing. If you get a chance, please go to Ayutthaya. But this head is the same. This is mid-Ayutthaya, 15th century, Khmer influence, so the face is quite square. It's a classic sandstone head of the Buddha. And just in terms of authenticating, if you have a look at this, look, it's got old repairs, it's got lacquer residue here. The break is very accidental at the top. So the face has pitting and damage, it has scratches on the edges. So you just look for damage. So I'll give you an example. You see that lorry? That lorry is 10 years old probably. So every time he parks, he hits the lamppost, or he hits the curb, or he hits another car, or somebody scratches the car. But nobody has gone to this lorry and gone, I'll damage this thing. It's done naturally over 10 years. So if you extrapolate that idea to an ancient sculpture like this, over the centuries it picks up damage and wear and nicks and knocks. So you see this, here's another one. This is a bronze image of Buddha. If you look at the base, this has been in a shrine or someone's house, and every time it's moved it's been scratched and knocked. So you look for incidental damage or accidental damage over the time. If it's faked, they'll make a new sculpture, and then they will enhance the patina artificially. So they'll bury it in the garden, or they'll use acid or chemicals to try and age it, or they'll chip it. So with a Khmer sculpture, they'll chip pieces. But when you have a genuinely ancient piece like that, for example, it's very natural wear and tear. So just look at, if you see a piece for the first time, just look at it and say, does this look convincing? Is it like this lorry that's been banged and scratched and hit? And if it's not, if it's too perfect, either it's been over-restored or it's fake. So if you don't feel comfortable with it, if it's too good to be true, or if it's too cheap, then don't touch it. There's probably a problem.